Spencer Morrison is our next guest, and he has written a book, Reshore: How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. I love the title of the book. Spencer, welcome to the truth. Donald Trump says he's got $12 trillion in investment promised for inside the United States from U.S. companies as well as foreign companies. That should take care of our unemployment, should it not?
I certainly think so. I think it's amazing news, and I think if you think through the logic of tariffs, it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, you think about when what companies have been doing for the last 50 years is they've been offshoring production abroad. There's been over 2 trillion, for example, $2 trillion worth of foreign direct investment that went into China, which ought to have went into America. On top of that, the indirect investment, this is the profits from the trade deficit. Over $25 trillion has flowed out of America through these trade deficits since 1974. All of that could have been used to build up this country. So, when we have $9, $10 trillion worth of domestic investment promised, I'm certainly not surprised, and I think it's going to go up.
Well, for the last 25 or 30 years, I've been continually frustrated by the number of U.S. companies that have gone outside our country for its manufacturing. And I just kind of wrung my hands and assumed that that's the way it was. And there was nothing that we could do about it. And then Donald Trump comes back into office for the second time and says, well, we're just going to tariff the hell out of our trading partners that are taking advantage of them, taking advantage of us. And it's like a light bulb went off. Like, duh, why hadn't anybody else thought of that before? We could have stopped this fleeing of American companies a long time ago had we had a backbone and the resolve to do it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And you have to remember, every other country has been tariffing America this whole time. America is really the only country that sort of embraced this loopy idea of global free trade. And you got to wonder, I mean, how can we have free trade with, the Communist Party of China? It's an oxymoron. It obviously doesn't make any sense. And if we just zero in on China, for example, China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. Since then, they've broken every agreement and every deal that they signed, every commitment they said they would do, they haven't done it. As a result, approximately depending on inflation rates, about $9 trillion worth of intellectual property has been stolen by China since 2000. The net trade deficit with them is about $7 trillion. 60,000 factories have closed, 5 million manufacturing jobs have been lost. And all of this was done on this pretense that we're going to get cheap Chinese goods. Well, I'll tell you what, the goods aren't so cheap when you don't have a job.
Well, and when you look at the other consequences that we are paying for it, like, as you say, the stealing of our intellectual property. And, the Chinese, they don't have any right to work laws. They don't have any child labor laws. They don't have environmental laws. They don't have the regulation that our companies do. And so it's so much easier and so much cheaper to make things in China. But then they tariff us when we send our goods into their country. So I've been sitting here wringing my hands like, well, the disparity in their ability to produce at less cost and our consumer wants for less expensive goods is just something that we can't overcome. But I kind of take China and put it in one department and everybody else in another. But China, to me, I've said on this program many times, it's been a theme of the truth that we are at war with China. No one evidently wants to acknowledge it, other than people like General Robert Spalding, who wrote Stealth Warfare, and Peter Schweitzer, who's written Red Handed and Blood Money, and Gordon Chang. I mean, they have been sounding the alarm, and it's sort of like they're in an echo chamber and no one else is listening. But I think people are finally starting to wake up, don't you?
Yeah, I think so, and I think a big part of that is the fact that the president of the United States came out and said the things that we've all been thinking. That China's been ripping us off.
100%.
And I think it was also really smart of the president to link the trade with China to the fentanyl crisis. People don't understand that this goes back hundreds of years to the first and the second opium wars. in the 1800s with Great Britain and European powers and China. China holds a very, very long memory. And what China is doing with fentanyl, I think, is very clear. Is uh, they're using fentanyl in the same way that the British used opium in the 1800s to sort of dope up the population and to recoup money on the black market. And this is a national crisis. I mean, we have over 70,000 people a year dying of opioids overdoses, another 20,000 through other illicit drugs, and this stuff is all coming from China, right? And I note that earlier this week we've been engaged with the trade talks with China. China's trade representatives have specifically said they're not cracking down on fentanyl. Why wouldn't they track? Why would they not crack down on an illegal drug trade? Right?
Well, and
Like
fentanyl is
historically.
not some recreational drug that you can just go out and take on a Friday night and have a good time. I mean, it literally kills people, and it is evidently extremely lethal. I mean, I campaigned for Attorney General in Georgia 2 years ago, and virtually every campaign stop I made, someone would come up to me and tell me a gut wrenching story, just a heart shattering story about how they lost a child to a fentanyl overdose. And in these remote towns in Georgia, police officers had to carry Narcan with them because contact with fentanyl was a regular occurrence, not an exceptional one. And why we are permitting this, or why we have permitted it, and why we're just now cracking down on it is bewildering to me. And what China's really end game is, I think, is the bigger question. Why would they want to inflict pain and suffering on the American people with the introduction of a lethal drug? What is their goal?
Well, I think there's a historical precedent for this. I mean, to some degree, I believe that China is using this to weaken the American people and the American people's resolve, in the same way that opium was used against the Chinese people in the early 1800s. I mean, this is all part of a broader sort of asymmetrical war that China has been waging against America and against the West more broadly. When China looks at the opium trade, they're not just looking at this as as a crime. They're looking at this as what will the effects of fentanyl do to the American population? How will this destabilize America? How can they gain leverage on this and other aspects? Because China doesn't want to fight a hot war. They're completely happy to sit back and to fight a war, using drugs, a war using cybersecurity, a war of espionage, a trade war. So China is waging really a multifaceted, let's call it what it is. It's a war
It,
against
it
America.
is a war, and they're fighting it in a variety of theaters, economically, as we've been talking about, and Trump trying to square that with the tariffs. They are doing it through espionage, like floating spy balloons over the heartland of our country and we've allowed them to linger over our most sensitive nuclear bases. The
Let me
fact
tell
that,
you a bit about. Let me tell you a bit about this espionage.
please,
I was talking to an inventor. He's a PhD in electrical engineering, and he was telling. So he invents technology that's employed by the U.S. military and other militaries around the world. He was telling me he stopped registering patents. He doesn't register patents for his inventions anymore because if he registers a patent, there's a Chinese knockoff on the market 6 months down the road. It takes him about 2 years to reverse engineer it if there's no patent. Uh, so I think it's really, really a dangerous thing that there's people. China's engaged in this espionage. They're in the U.S. Patent Office. They're in the corporate boardrooms. And of course, here's another main vector of this intellectual property theft. When an American company goes to build a factory in China, they have to partner with a Chinese corporation. It's a 50-50 joint
yeah.
venture. And as a part of that venture, they have to undertake to train the Chinese workers, and they have to provide their technology, all of the technology, the schematics, the machinery, what they're producing. All of that gets handed over carte blanche to the Chinese. And of course, that is the biggest vector by which this American intellectual property gets transferred to China. And it's usually not even counted in the statistics because it's done legally. The companies just hand the tech over to China.
Well, and to further bum out our audience, China is now known to be engaging in agro-biological warfare. The FBI has now intercepted 3 individuals who were smuggling fungus into the I guess that would be fungi, into the United States to the University of Michigan, where they were supposedly conducting experiments with this fungus. But the fungus has the potential to wipe out our corn, soybeans, and wheat crops. And it's evidently an extremely uh, easy fungus to spread. And one guy was deported. Unfortunately, I wish we had put him in handcuffs and invited him into the country. But his girlfriend and now a third actor has been discovered. I mean, this is serious stuff that we're combating.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the scale of the technological theft, is hard to quantify. If you look at just the sort of fair market value of things, we're talking about 9, 10 trillion dollars. But of course, the value of the technology is a lot more than that. I mean, what China's been able to do over the last 20, 25 years is completely uh, reform its society from a largely agrarian, sort of low-tech society into, an advanced economy. They've been able to put up 140,000 miles of rail track in 20 years, for example. They have state-of-the-art, uh, airports, all sorts of stuff, and that was all bought and funded by us.
Maybe could induce some of those people who have developed the Chinese railroad to come to California and finish the bullet train that we've spent billions of dollars on, and I think they've got 1 mile of track to show for it. It is such an embarrassment. So we've got China, and then there's everybody else. I kind of put the EU in its own category as well, but then everybody else seems to really kind of be falling in line. Vietnam was like one of the first to say we're reducing our tariffs to zero. I think India has all but eliminated their tariffs, and but the EU is going kicking and screaming like a spoiled child who can't get dessert after their meal at night, and we have spoiled them so bad since World War II, when I think we were legitimately motivated to help try and rebuild Europe, which we saved from the Germans during World War II. They've got evidently extremely short memories, and I think the trade imbalance was intentionally created historically, but today you'd have to make a you'd have to dig pretty deep to come up with an intellectual argument why there should be an imbalance of trade with Europe now. Wouldn't, don't you think?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, the trade imbalance with Europe, as you correctly pointed out, was deliberate. It was a part of the Marshall Plan. It was a way to rebuild Europe. So European producers were able to sell their products in America, largely tariff-free. And of course, on the flip side of that, they had high tariffs to protect and rebuild their industry, and that was part of a deliberate plan in order to rebuild Western Europe. But of course, Europe was rebuilt, well over 60, 70 years ago at this stage. And
Yeah,
yet
and
the taps never turned off.
their population rivals ours, and their GDP is actually larger than ours in the aggregate today. So does Trump
Yeah.
get these tariffs over the line? Does he prevail? I mean, it seems like he's bitten off an awful lot in a short period of time. I watched Wilbur Ross on an interview yesterday, and he said he's trying to do in 90 days, which should probably take 4 years. But what odds do you ascribe to his being able to get these tariffs pushed through?
I think President Trump can make it happen. The issue is whether or not Congress and the courts are going to allow this to pass through. We saw 2 weeks ago, for example, a number of federal injunctions blocking the tariffs, and of course those were overturned on appeal, and likely some of those cases are going to go to the Supreme Court. The question being whether or not the president actually has the authority to institute these tariffs. I'm a lawyer. I think he does, but of course there are there's legitimate, there are legitimate grievances that Congress has the power over taxation. I would say that, those were, in terms of these tariffs, were delegated, of course, to the president and the executive branch. But then, of course, there's Congress. I mean, Rand Paul in Congress, in the Senate, tried to block the tariffs about a month and a half ago now, on these same grounds.
I did
And
not
yet,
know that, and that's astounding that
tied
the
vote.
defender of capitalism and free trade would want to block tariffs that are designed to balance trade. That doesn't compute for me. What's up?
Yeah, it was, it went to a tied vote. J.D. Vance cast the, the vice president cast the tied vote, and the tariffs stayed in place. But Senator Paul, to his credit, he was essentially saying that Congress has the power over taxation, and of course that's true. But Congress has also delegated powers to the president in order to handle trade imbalances specifically for these purposes. So I think the tariffs are certainly legal. I think that they're necessary. And I really do think that Congress ought to be working on, a reindustrialization bill to codify these tariffs for the long run, and then, of course, to provide other sorts of relief to reindustrialize America. Because the reality is that without industry, without the ability to manufacture the necessities of life, we don't actually have a country. And this is why the very first piece of legislation in this country was the Tariff Act of 1789.
Well, what a great opportunity it presents to the United States today for a new source of revenue. I mean, it's going to be like found money, and we're not talking about a few dollars and cents. We're talking about potentially hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And plus, the opportunity that it poses for employment in our country as these companies start to build the plants that they have committed to, which total 10 or 12 trillion dollars as of the last count. I mean, that's earth-shattering news, is it not? That should be celebrated?
It's millions and millions of jobs. Since 2020, since 2021, over 5 million good-paying manufacturing jobs have disappeared. And then on top of that, about 5 to 7 million service jobs that were supported by those manufacturing jobs. Those also disappeared. And you wonder, well, what's the employment rate looking like? Where's that accounted for? You know how it's accounted for? If you lose your job and you're chronically unemployed for over a month and you don't send out any resumes, they move you from the unemployed category into the not in labor force category. So the amount of people who've dropped out of the labor force in the last 20 years has been astronomical, and it's not accounted for by the aging population. I do that math in my book in chapter 1 of Reshore. We talk all about how the unemployment rate is basically a sham. The actual unemployment rate is 2 to 3 times higher than what they say. And the reason for that is because they're trying to hide the damage. But anybody who drives through rural areas can totally see the damage. I mean, these communities look like they've been bombed out. People are on drugs. Factories are closed. People are unemployed. The number of people who are, on disability, the number of people who are on other forms of social assistance have all increased. And these are huge social problems that are all downstream of the economic problems. When we talk about money, it's not just about money. You need money to build healthy communities and to support healthy big families.
Well, those are excellent points. What about the humanoid robot and the advance of robotics in our manufacturing? While those jobs start coming back, are we now just going to displace them all over again?
It's interesting you mentioned that. I think it's a thoughtful point. It's a point that I've written on, not only in the book, but on my Substack. And the reality is that there's automation and robotics are a really powerful tool to increase productivity. But increases in productivity don't necessarily destroy jobs, provided that the output also increases. So what we've had over the last 20 years is we've had factories becoming more efficient, but the increase in output was offshored to China and to other countries. So that's the reason that we've, when people say that, the reason that the manufacturing employment is decreasing is because of robotics, that's only half the equation. The other half of the equation is the fact that America's output hasn't kept pace with the productivity increases, as was the case from 1940 till 1973. I mean, output used to increase at a rapid rate that matched productivity, and that's why we didn't see people losing their jobs in the 1960s and 70s.
Well, thank you for the college course on tariffs and economics. It has been a fascinating conversation. Spencer Morrison is an author. He also is editor-in-chief at the National Economics Editorial. Where do I find the National Economics Editorial? I want to subscribe. I mean that sincerely.
So I've moved the National Economics Editorial onto my Substack because we were delisted. We were delisted by Google for apparently wrong thing.
How did you make them mad?
You must have during COVID.
So it's not about capitalism and free speech. I don't know.
When you attack their money, they don't like it. I'll tell you that. So you can find me on Substack and X. It's at Real SP Morrison. And then the book Reshore, we've got a beautiful second edition that's just come out. It's available on Amazon. Get it. It's endorsed by Peter Navarro. It's endorsed by Steve Bannon. It's been circulated at the White House. There's no reason not to read it. It's your blueprint on how to reindustrialize America and make America rich again.
Well, I've been wanting to get a book that my friend Bob Lighthizer might find interesting. So I'm going to go buy that book, one for me and one for Bob. I don't know if he's read it or not, but he was Trump's lead trade negotiator in Trump 1.0. I wish you'd
I've
bring
read
him.
his book.
Yeah,
Great book.
no trade is free. He is a great guy. He's been on our show, and I consider him a friend. And so I know he would enjoy your book. And thank you so much for coming on The Truth today. I hope you'll come back soon.
It would be my pleasure. God bless.
Thank you, Spencer. Named similarly to my middle son, who is also very intelligent. Spencer Morrison. Thanks, and have a great rest of your weekend. This is The Truth. I'm John Gordon, and we come to you every week on the John Fredericks Radio Network in 7 cities on 20 AM and FM radio stations. We are also simulcast across the 13 digital platforms on CDM Press. We also come to you on our own live stream on X and YouTube and Facebook, Getter, Rumble, and don't forget johngordon.tv. So come and join us there. Right now on Getter, we've got 6,000 people interacting with us. We hope you'll come and join us there as well. We also have our own Getter page. Most of you are on the John Fredericks Getter page. We'd like you to migrate over to John Gordon Truth. We'd like to build that channel and be able to interact with you there independently as well. So consider, if you're on Getter, just going to search for John Gordon Truth, subscribe and like if you do, and we can interact with you on our own Getter page as we march on. The show is building. We really appreciate every listener who comes here every Saturday from 10 to noon. We're also on Sundays from the same hours, 10 to noon, on the John Fredericks Radio Network. And you can write to me, johngordontruth@gmail.com. I'll read your email, I'll respond to your email, and I will seriously reflect on whatever it is you have to say.